They say some places are born bad, cursed from the very start. You feel it even before you step foot in them. And that's exactly what happened when Lewis Creed moved his family to that house on the edge of Ludlow, Maine. You see, Louis was a doctor from Chicago, ready to start fresh as the new head of medical services at the university. He brought his wife Rachel and their two young children, Ellie and Gage, to what should have been a peaceful place. But peace was the last thing they'd find there. Almost as soon as they arrived, things started going wrong. Little Ellie scraped her knee on her first day, and Gage, barely a toddler, was stung by a bee. Then he nearly got hit by a truck speeding down that old highway just outside the house. An elderly neighbour, Judd Crandall, was quick to warn Lewis and Rachel about those trucks that never seemed to stop tearing down that road. But the warnings barely prepared them for what lay ahead. Judd and Lewis struck up a friendship right away. Judd, 83, and wise beyond his years, became a father figure to Louis, who'd lost his own father as a young child. And oh, how Judd knew things. Things about that land, things that would have been better left unsaid. Not long after the Creed settled in, Judd took the family on a strange little outing down a winding path behind their house. It led to an eerie place, a pet cemetery where the children of the town had buried their pets. A few days later, Louis and Rachel argued bitterly about that walk. Rachel wanted nothing to do with that cemetery. Something about it had unsettled her deeply, but she couldn't quite put it into words. It wasn't long before Louis felt the chilling touch of death himself. One day, a student named Victor Pascoe arrived in Louis's care, severely injured and breathing his last. As Louis watched Pascoe die, the young man's last words felt like a warning, even though Louis tried to shake it off. But that night Louis dreamed, or maybe it wasn't a dream, that Pascoe came back to him. In the strange vision, Pascoe's spirit led him to the pet cemetery and warned him, voice grave and urgent, never to go beyond the line of tangled branches and ancient trees. Don't cross this line, no matter how much you think you must. When Louis woke, the pine needles and dirt on his feet made him realize he'd been somewhere. The boundary between dream and reality had blurred, and the seeds of something dark had already begun to take root. When Church, Ellie's beloved cat, died suddenly, Judd saw his chance to make good on that promise. But instead of burying Church in the pet cemetery, Judd led Louis somewhere far worse, an old burial ground, abandoned by the Micmac Indians, dark and ancient, and filled with a sinister energy. Louis buried the cat there, under Judd's watchful eye, though he couldn't understand why. The next day Church came back, but he wasn't the same. Church's eyes had lost their luster, his movements were slow and eerie, and he emitted a stench so foul that even Ellie recoiled from her beloved pet. Church began hunting with a strange cruelty, killing mice and birds but never eating them, just leaving them mangled and bloody as if for Louis to find. When Louis asked Judd what had happened, Judd revealed his own dark history with that cursed ground. As a boy, Judd had buried his dog, Spot, there, led by a strange man named Stanny B, who seemed to know more than he should. When Louis confronted her, Rachel told him of a terrible memory, one she had buried deep. Her sister Zelda had suffered and wasted away from spinal meningitis, hidden from the world by her ashamed parents, locked away like a dark family secret. Rachel was just a girl when Zelda died, yet she remembered feeling a sick relief, an unbearable weight lifted. But guilt gnawed at her for years, filling her with a fear of death so profound that even discussing it was too painful. Louis understood her better after that, and death seemed to circle closer to them. But the real horror struck not long after, when Gage, precious little Gage, wandered into the road and was struck by a truck. The family shattered, crushed by the senselessness of it. At the funeral, Louis's grief turned to anger, even rage, when Rachel's father, who'd always looked down on him, attacked him in front of everyone. The burial barely cold, Louis's thoughts drifted to the unthinkable. That Indian burial ground had the power to bring the dead back. But what price would it ask? Judd sensed Louis's thoughts and warned him, finally admitting that he hadn't told him the full truth. Long ago, a boy named Timmy Bateman had been buried in that cursed earth by his grieving father. When Timmy returned, it wasn't really Timmy who came back. The townsfolk had seen him walking the streets with vacant eyes and an unsettling, twisted grin. They had confronted Timmy's father, but Timmy's eerie knowledge of their private secrets had terrified them all. They left, knowing that whatever had returned wasn't human. That night, Timmy's father ended it all, burning down his house and taking his life. Judd confessed that he felt guilty, that he believed the evil power of that burial ground had somehow pulled Louis's family into its grasp. But Louis's heartache drowned out his reason. He convinced himself that Gage could return as the boy he'd been, innocent and loving. He sent Rachel and Ellie away to Chicago, making excuses to buy time. He told himself that if Gage came back wrong, he'd take care of it quietly. Meanwhile, Rachel and Ellie were on the road when Ellie had a nightmare. Victor Pascoe was in it, warning her that her father was about to do something terrible. Desperate and afraid, Rachel turned back, but obstacles blocked her path, as if fate itself was conspiring to keep her away. That night, Louis dug up Gage's tiny coffin and took him to the burial ground. Along the way, he felt an ancient presence, something evil lurking in the shadows. The Wendigo, the malevolent spirit of the woods, watching him, urging him onward. With trembling hands, he placed Gage's lifeless body into that cursed soil. When Gage returned, he was something monstrous. He slinked back into their home, stealing a scalpel, and made his way to Judd's house. Judd saw the horror too late. Gage, twisted by dark forces, taunted Judd, tormenting him with memories and accusations before he and Church killed him with merciless precision. Rachel arrived in Ludlow, unknowingly stepping into the nightmare her husband had unleashed. Drawn into Judd's house, she found Gage waiting for her. She wept, unable to comprehend what she was seeing as he, too, turned on her with deadly intent. By morning, Louis awoke to a scene of unimaginable horror, realizing what he had done, the lives destroyed by his actions. In his desperation, he considered ending his own life, but instead he steeled himself and set out to destroy the evil he had unleashed. With grim determination, he killed Church and went to face Gage one last time. He found Rachel's mutilated body upstairs, and then Gage lunged at him. Heartbroken and resolute, Louis finally put his son to rest, injecting him with a lethal dose and sending him back to the grave. But grief and guilt had sunk their claws too deep. His mind twisted by the dark power of the burial ground, Louis convinced himself that if Gage had returned as a monster, it was only because he had waited too long to bury him. He burned down Judd's house, then carried Rachel's body back to that cursed earth, believing she would come back as the wife he'd loved. In the dead of night, he was met by his colleague Steve, who glimpsed the horrors Louis carried. But the force of the burial ground, that dark pull, kept Steve silent. That night, as Louis sat by his desk, sifting through papers and waiting, he felt a chill run down his spine. A cold hand touched his shoulder, and he heard Rachel's voice, a single word, soft and venomous, "Darling." Some stories don't end. They wait in shadows, in places where things that shouldn't come back find a way to cross over. And that cursed place behind the Creed house, that pet cemetery and what lay beyond, was just such a place. If you liked our video, please like, subscribe and leave a comment.